In a quiet home, two little girls sit beside their unconscious mother, their innocent hearts filled with fear. One clutches a phone, begging for help, while the other holds her mother's hand, praying she will wake up. But in that moment of despair, destiny brings an unexpected person into their lives, a millionaire whose heart will be changed forever by their love and innocence. This is not just a story of wealth and pain, but of hope, kindness, and the power of family. The apartment felt different that night. It wasn't the usual warmth of their mother humming in the kitchen, or the laughter of two little girls chasing each other around the couch. Instead, there was silence. Heavy, pressing silence, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. 7-year-old Doris sat on the floor with her coloring book, but something didn't feel right. She glanced at her mother lying on the couch, still as stone. At first, she thought maybe Mom was just sleeping, but her chest didn't rise the way it normally did. "Mom?" Doris whispered, her voice trembling. She nudged her with small fingers. "Wake up, please." Nothing. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and suddenly the room didn't feel safe anymore. She called again, louder this time. Still, no answer. That's when 6-year-old Mia came running, clutching her doll tightly. "What's wrong? Mom's not waking up!" Doris's eyes filled with tears, her words breaking. Mia froze, her little face pale with fear. She dropped the doll and grabbed her sister's hand. Her tiny voice shook. "What do we do? Should we call somebody?" Doris swallowed hard. She wanted to be strong, but her hands were trembling. She turned to the small wooden table beside the couch. Their mother's phone was there, lying face down. The girls had seen their mom use it 1,000 times, but they barely knew how. With shaking fingers, Doris picked it up. She swiped the screen the way she had seen adults do. The glowing list of contacts appeared. Her eyes darted over the names. Aunt Maggie, a neighbor, a few co-workers. Then one stood out. Mr. Maxwell. Her heart raced. Who was he? She didn't know, but the name looked important. "Mia," Doris whispered. "Should I press this one?" Mia's lips quivered. "I don't know, but maybe he can help. Please, just call." Doris pressed the name. Her thumb shook so much she almost dropped the phone. The ringing began. Long, terrifying rings that seemed to echo in the silence of their small apartment. Each second felt endless. The girls clung to each other, staring at their mother who still wasn't moving. Tears slipped down Mia's cheeks. "Please, someone answer." Then click. A deep, calm voice came through the speaker. "Hello? Who is this?" The sound startled Doris, and she nearly dropped the phone again. She pushed it close to Mia, too scared to speak. Mia's voice cracked as she spoke into the phone. Please! Our mommy won't wake up. We don't know what to do." The man on the other end froze. His chair creaked as he sat upright, the air caught in his throat. That was not the voice of an adult. It was small, frightened, desperate. His heart skipped. He didn't know these children. He didn't even know how they had his number, but something in the way that little voice trembled tore right through him. He closed his eyes for a second, gripping the phone tighter. One thing was clear, he couldn't ignore that call. "Stay calm," he said, his voice steady though his chest tightened. "Don't be afraid. Tell me where you are. I'm coming." And for the first time that evening, in the middle of fear and silence, the girls felt the faintest flicker of hope. Carlos Maxwell had lived 37 years of his life with one rule: never let emotions control you. In the boardroom, he was known as unshakable, sharp, strict, and untouchable. He had built an empire with steel nerves and cold decisions. But that call, that trembling little voice had slipped past all the walls he built around his heart. It was unlike anything he had ever heard. A child begging for help, their words breaking with fear. At first, Carlos thought someone was playing a trick on him. Who would call him, the billionaire CEO, for such a personal emergency? But the sound of a sob, so raw and innocent, silenced all doubts. He knew it was real. Without hesitation, Carlos abandoned his black car waiting outside the company. He jumped in, telling his driver the address the girls stammered out. "Step on it," he ordered, his tone urgent, nothing like the calm, cold voice his employees usually feared. His mind raced as the city lights blurred past. He didn't know the woman, he didn't know the children, but he couldn't push away the image of two little girls alone in the dark, clutching a phone, terrified that their mother wasn't breathing. By the time he reached the narrow street, his chest ached from the weight of anticipation. The apartment building was modest, old bricks with peeling paint. Not the kind of place he ever visited, but tonight, nothing else mattered. Carlos leaped out of the car and rushed up the narrow stairs, guided by the faint sound of a child crying. His polished shoes echoed against the steps, each beat making his heart pound harder. Then he reached the door. It was unlocked. Slowly, carefully, he pushed it open. The sight inside froze him where he stood. The small apartment was dimly lit by a single lamp. On the carpet, two little girls huddled together, their tiny arms wrapped around each other for courage. And on the couch lay their mother, still motionless, her face pale. Carlos felt something twist deep inside him. This was no business meeting, no contract, no power play. This was life and fear and innocence staring back at him. One of the girls, the older one with wide, frightened eyes, looked up at him. Her voice quivered as she asked, Who are you?" Carlos lowered himself to his knees so he wouldn't tower over them. His sharp suit and commanding presence seemed out of place here, but his voice was gentle, softer than he ever remembered it being. "I'm Carlos," he said quietly. "You called me. Don't be afraid. I'm here to help." The younger girl, her cheeks streaked with tears, clung tighter to her sister. Carlos moved closer to the couch, his hands steady even though his heart was racing. He bent down, checking the woman's pulse at her wrist, praying he wasn't too late. Relief washed over him when he felt a faint, weak but steady beat. "She's breathing," he said firmly, turning back to the girls. "She's going to be okay." They looked at him with trembling hope, clinging to every word. Carlos pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services, his voice sharp with urgency, yet calm enough to keep the children from panicking. He gave the address, explained the condition, and demanded speed. Then, without hesitation, he returned to the girls, opening his arms. They hesitated for a moment. Then Doris, the braver one, leaned into him first. Mia followed, clutching his sleeve tightly. Carlos held them close, his strong arms wrapping around their tiny frames as though shielding them from the darkness around them. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, his deep voice steady and protective. "You're not alone anymore. I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Carlos Maxwell, the man the world knew as cold and untouchable, felt the warmth of something stronger than power or wealth. He felt the fragile weight of trust. And he knew, deep inside, this night would change everything. The sound of sirens filled the night as the paramedics rushed into the small apartment. Their voices were urgent, their movements quick, but to the two little girls clutching Carlos's hands, it all felt like a blur. They watched in silent terror as the paramedics lifted their mother onto a stretcher. Tubes, flashing lights, hushed medical terms. It was all too much for children so young to understand. Mia buried her face against Carlos's arm, trembling. Doris held on to her sister tightly, trying to be strong, though her small chin quivered. Carlos's instincts screamed at him to stay close. He didn't even consider leaving. He walked right beside the stretcher, one big hand holding both little hands, guiding them down the dim stairwell and into the waiting ambulance. "Please come with us," Doris whispered, her eyes searching his face. Carlos bent down, meeting her gaze with surprising softness. "I'm not leaving you, I promise." Inside the hospital, everything smelled of antiseptic and rushing urgency. Nurses moved quickly, doctors gave orders, and yet for the girls, all they saw was their mother disappearing through swinging doors into a room they were not allowed to enter. Mia let out a sob. "What if she never comes back?" Carlos knelt down, pulling her close. "Shh, she's strong, she's fighting, and the doctors are doing everything to help her." His deep voice was calm, steady, a rock for them to hold on to in the storm. They were taken to the waiting area. The room was quiet, filled with plastic chairs and faint buzzing lights. For most, it was just another waiting room. But for Doris and Mia, it was a place of heavy fear. Carlos sat down between them. The chairs were too big for the little girls, their legs dangling in the air. Doris bit her lip, staring at the floor, while Mia rested her head against his arm, her small body trembling. Moments passed in silence until Doris finally whispered, her voice small but heavy with wonder, "Are you an angel?" Carlos froze. Of all the questions he had been asked in his life, from investors, from employees, from rivals, nothing had ever struck him like that. His throat tightened, and for a moment he didn't know how to answer. He looked into her wide, hopeful eyes. Then slowly, his voice broke the silence. "No, sweetheart. I'm not an angel. I'm just a man. But I promise you this. You are not alone tonight. Not anymore." The words hung in the air like a warm blanket. Doris leaned against him, her tiny body finally letting go of some of the fear. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like a lifetime. The girls grew restless, their little hands fidgeting, their eyes darting every time footsteps echoed down the hall. To distract them, Carlos began to talk. He told them gentle stories, not about business or money, but about courage and hope. He spoke of a bird who got lost in a storm but found its way back home, stronger than before. He described a tiny seed that grew into a tall tree because it never gave up. His deep voice wrapped around them, soothing their fears, holding their fragile hearts together. At one point, Mia shivered, rubbing her arms. Without hesitation, Carlos took off his expensive tailored coat and draped it around both girls. The fabric nearly swallowed them, but they cuddled into it as if it were the safest blanket in the world. Later, he noticed their tired eyes fighting against sleep. Quietly, he stood, walked to the vending machine, and returned with 2 warm cups of cocoa. The steam rose gently as he handed them over. "Careful, it's hot," he whispered. The girls sipped slowly, their hands small against the cups, their eyes lifting to him with gratitude. It wasn't just cocoa. It was comfort. It was hope. When they grew sleepier, their heads leaned against him, one on each side. Carlos looked down at them, his heart strangely heavy yet full. These 2 little souls had clung to him as though he were their anchor, and for the first time in years, he felt needed, truly needed. He tightened his arm around them protectively, his eyes fixed on the hospital doors where their mother was being treated. He was a man used to fighting battles in boardrooms, winning deals, and conquering markets. But tonight, in this waiting room, holding 2 frightened little girls close, Carlos Maxwell realized this was the most important battle he had ever stepped into, the battle to give them hope. And he vowed silently to himself that he would not leave until their mother opened her eyes again. The hours had felt endless. Every tick of the hospital clock was like a drumbeat inside Doris and Mia's tiny hearts. They clung to Carlos's hands, eyes glued to the doors until finally a nurse came out with a tired smile. "She's stable now," the nurse said softly. "You can see her." Relief swept over the girls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. They ran forward, dragging Carlos with them down the long, pale hallway. His long strides carried them quickly until they reached a quiet room where their mother lay resting on the hospital bed, pale but alive. "Mommy!" Doris cried, her little hands reaching out as she climbed onto the bed. Mia followed, clinging to her mother's arm as if afraid she would disappear again. Their mother stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Weak though she was, her lips curved into the faintest smile when she saw her daughters safe beside her. She stroked their hair with trembling fingers, her voice faint but full of love. "My girls, you're safe." Carlos stood back, giving them space. His tall figure lingered near the door, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes soft with relief. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he had wanted her to survive, not just for the girls, but for reasons he couldn't quite explain. Then, slowly, the woman's tired gaze shifted. Her eyes landed on him. She blinked, as though uncertain, then her lips parted in a faint whisper. "Mr. Maxwell?" Carlos froze. The air in his chest stopped moving. His name, spoken in her weak, fragile voice, struck him like a lightning bolt. You know me?" His words came out rougher than he intended, laced with disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, I used to work at your company, years ago, in the mailroom." Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, her frail body trembling with exhaustion. "You probably don't remember me. I was just another face, but one day, you gave me your number. It was nothing to you, I'm sure. You told me to call if I ever had trouble with a delivery." She gave a small, broken laugh. "I never thought I would use it. Like this." Carlos felt the world tilt beneath him. The memory was faint, but real. He had given out his number once, perhaps without thinking, a small act of kindness lost to time. Yet this woman had never erased it. She had kept it all these years, tucked away like a lifeline she never thought she'd need. And now, because of that one forgotten moment, her children had reached him. The realization stunned him. Out of all the names in her phone, out of all the people they could have called, fate had placed his name under their small, trembling fingers. Carlos swallowed hard, his usual controlled composure slipping away. He stepped closer, his voice low but filled with something he couldn't hide. "So that's how they called me?" The woman nodded weakly, her eyes shimmering with both gratitude and shame. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to trouble you, but my girls, they must have found your number." Carlos glanced at Doris and Mia, still clinging to their mother, unaware of the weight of the moment. His chest tightened. He was a man who believed in logic, in numbers, in control. But this was something different. This was destiny. He looked back at the fragile woman lying before him, then at the two little girls whose trust had already wrapped itself around his guarded heart. And in that moment, Carlos Maxwell, billionaire CEO, realized something he had never believed before. Sometimes, life doesn't follow the rules of business or logic. Sometimes, life is written by fate, and fate had led him here, for them. The hospital no longer felt like a cold, sterile place for Carlos. Day after day, as he returned, it became something strangely warm, because two little faces were always waiting for him. The first time he walked back through the white hospital doors after that night, Doris squealed with joy. She leaped off the chair, her small shoes clapping against the floor as she ran into his arms. "You came back," she said, her voice bright and full of relief. Mia, more reserved, only smiled shyly at first. But when Carlos crouched down and held out his hand, she slipped her tiny fingers into his without a word. That small gesture was enough. It spoke louder than anything. From that moment, his visits became a rhythm. Each day after meetings, instead of heading straight to his glass mansion, Carlos found himself stopping at the hospital first. He began bringing little surprises, boxes of crayons, coloring books with princesses and castles, soft teddy bears, and puzzles to keep their minds busy. The girls' laughter filled the once dreary room, bouncing off the pale walls and making even the nurses stop to smile. Sometimes Doris would chatter endlessly, her bold spirit shining. She told him stories about school, about how she wanted to be a teacher someday, about the games she and Mia played at home. She even declared once, "Mr. Carlos, you're my new best friend." Carlos chuckled, but deep down those words lit something inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Mia was quieter, softer. She didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. Every time she slipped her hand into his, every time she rested her head against his arm, Carlos felt her silent trust. It melted the walls he had built around himself. Walls no one in business could ever break through. With their mother still recovering, Carlos often found himself helping in ways he never imagined. adjusting pillows, fetching water, making sure the doctors explained things clearly. It was small, ordinary care, but to him, it felt extraordinary. Because for once, he wasn't the CEO making decisions for thousands. He wasn't the billionaire people admired or envied. He was just Carlos, a man sitting quietly in a hospital room, making sure two little girls and their mother felt safe. One evening, Doris asked him, "Do you live alone?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. My house is very big. Too big." Doris tilted her head. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Her innocent question pierced him more deeply than any business rival ever had. For years, he had filled his life with wealth, meetings, and power to avoid that very truth. But here, in front of these children, he couldn't lie. "Yes," he admitted softly, "it gets very lonely." Doris looked at Mia, then back at him. "Not anymore. You have us now." Mia gave the faintest nod, her little fingers tightening around his hand. Carlos's chest tightened. Those words, spoken so easily, without hesitation, were something he had secretly longed for his entire life: belonging, family. For the first time in years, Carlos didn't feel like a man standing outside of life, watching others live. He felt included. As the days passed, the hard edges of his world, the endless business deals, the cold marble floors of his mansion, the silence of his empty dining table, began to soften, all because two little girls had chosen him. And every time they hugged him and called him Mr. Carlos, he realized he had finally found something money could never buy: belonging. Weeks later, their mother fully recovered. Before Carlos left one evening, Doris stopped him at the door. "Mr. Carlos," she said, looking up with wide eyes. "You didn't have to come that night, but you did. That means you're family now." Mia nodded, clinging to his leg. "We love you." For the first time in years, Carlos Maxwell's eyes burned with tears. He crouched down, wrapping the little girls in his arms. "And I love you too. You saved me as much as I saved you." From that night on, Carlos became more than just a millionaire CEO. He became a protector, a father figure, and proof that kindness could change lives. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Family is not just about blood, it's about showing up when someone needs you most. And in a society where many people feel alone, Carlos Maxwell proved that compassion, no matter where it comes from, can heal hearts and build new families.